Forgiveness, the gateway to freedom. I'm Jill Rowe, and in this episode of the Different Podcast, Steve Chalke and I chat about forgiveness and grudges. We talk openly and honestly about times in our own lives when forgiveness has been something we have made our way to, having realised that unforgiveness was toxic. We describe how forgiveness is in fact a gateway to freedom and come to see that Jesus was inviting us to discover our own healing when we forgive our enemies. We chat about how to live into the future rather than using the past as our reference point. This discussion was a great reminder of why forgiveness is such a profoundly powerful force for good and for transformation. May it bring goodness and hope to you. So this is episode... Well, I have no idea. I'm being honest with you, Steve.
This is the next episode.
This is the next episode of Different. It's really good to see you. How's your day been?
It's been busy. It's been, up and down. I don't know how your days go. Sometimes at the end of the day, something just great has happened just before the end of the day, and it's a good day. And sometimes something really, really, you get a difficult email or a tough meeting. But today's a good day because it's ending with this.
Well, and it's Friday. And you've just told me that you're getting a haircut tomorrow.
I'm going to get my hair cut tomorrow. Do you know something? My hair's so long, and I look in the mirror and I think, oh, no. But like the meetings and stuff, But last weekend, I was so annoyed that I could hardly see as my hair falls in front of my eyes. I was in Liverpool and I phoned up. And I said...
You made an appointment?
I phoned up and made an appointment because I know that hairdresser, her name's Falula, actually.
That's such a great name.
Falula. It's a great name for a great
Mine's
name for a
called
person.
Ramla. My hairdresser's called Ramla.
And I phoned up Falula and I said, can I come and get my hair cut next Saturday? And she said, can't you come midweek? And I said, no, I can't. I can't. And like that. And she said, well, I can't fit you in on Saturday. And I said, oh, my hair's just have to get longer. She said, why don't you come on Friday? I said, because I'm working. And in the end, she said, oh, I'll move somebody and I'll squeeze you in
Special
at
treatment.
10:20. So I'm going to get my hair cut.
So when I see you on Sunday, you'll be looking...
Short hair.
Yeah.
Pretty good, eh?
Less hippie.
Less hippie. There you go.
Anyway,
what are we talking about, Jill?
Today we're going to talk about the idea of forgiveness and grudges, and unforgiveness is like a weapon.
It really is a weapon.
Yeah.
It's a weapon. And I think the terrible thing about unforgiveness is it's often a weapon that's turned on yourself, isn't it?
Oh, completely.
Self-destructive. Often the other person doesn't know anything about it. It's killing you.
Yeah.
So is this something you struggle a bit with there, Jill, as you chose this subject? Is this a bit of therapy?
No, I mean, it can be. But I think, so as you know, my parents split up when I was 11. And so forgiveness is an important feature of my journey, I think, because I realised at a young age, what unforgiveness does to you. So my dad left. He'd been having an affair with someone, and I was angry about that. It wasn't right. It was unfair. I didn't understand. I was 11, and all the rest of it. And I held resentment. I held anger. I felt a particular way. It was under the surface, but I felt a particular way towards my dad. And then you just get to a point where you go, this is like something toxic inside of you, and it shows itself in all sorts of different ways. It comes out in all sorts of different ways. It leaks out. And and like you just said, the unforgiveness probably damages you who's holding it far more than the hope that you feel you have, which is, I hope the other person is suffering as a result of me not forgiving them, which is a lot to work through when you're like 12 and 13 years old. But yeah, so forgiveness for me, I realised, is like a gateway to freedom. And unforgiveness is a trap.
Yeah. I don't want to be over religious about it, but Jesus once said, "Forgive your enemies,"
Yeah.
and I've heard loads of times, people are on the end, "Forgive your enemies," because it really pisses them off. You know, but the point, of course, isn't that at all.
No.
It's and that's what Jesus was talking
Yeah.
about. It's about bringing healing to yourself,
Yeah.
release to yourself. Your
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. And I think for me, it created all sorts of insecurities as well. So, seeking affirmation from people that was a ridiculous expectation to have. It was, like, and all of those kind of things. And then I remember at university, it just all kind of came to a head. And I remember the chaplain, he was a lovely guy, he was called Graham, really fantastic university chaplain. And he just said, we're going to get 2 swear words in a very short part of the podcast. But he just said, he was brilliant. He just said, life's shit sometimes, isn't it? And it was, I was like, yeah. And he said, and sometimes you just have to let it go. Don't sing Frozen tunes right now. But it was a really smart thing to say. It was like, yes, it was an acknowledgement of there's this thing that's happened that hasn't felt right and hasn't been right and has caused you hurt, but holding on to that is not doing you any good whatsoever. So just let that go and live life, like live into the future, not keep using the past as your reference point. Yeah, so that's like that was a big learning for me as a teenager. So yeah, little story of forgiveness, Steve. Yeah. What about you?
Well, yeah, I suppose we all tread the same pathway through life. I think as you're talking, the thing that springs to mind, I'm trying to think of, the lessons I've learned or tried to learn around this for the years. Of course, what happened to me, something you know about very well, is when I stood up inside a religious church context for gay people, gay and trans people, LGBT people, well, I got,
Yeah.
it was horrendous. In fact, oh no, this was before the LGBT thing. I wrote a book.
You
It's
wrote
called
the other book.
Lost Message of Jesus, when I said God is love, so
There's
the
no one
way that
out.
so got all this stuff about God's anger and God's wrath, and He's gonna get you and banish you to hell and all that.
The
I mean,
vindictive God.
yeah, it's just nowhere, in my understanding of the Bible, if you read it in context, And I got in a lot of trouble for that. And Chris, your brother-in-law, and your sister Chrissy were huge support to me. And Chris, your brother-in-law, I was put on a trial. Do you remember
I
that?
remember I was
Like,
there.
yeah, it's like 700 people came to listen to me. Like, talk about
Justify yourself.
why I wouldn't be chucked out of the evangelical churches, and I suppose Oasis with me. And your Chris was so kind to me, and then they organised this worldwide symposium. Do you remember that? And wrote books about it and all this kind of thing. I thought, well, I was little old me writing a book about what I thought, but the hatred that some people had for me, and then that was followed up about 10 years after that when I wrote about our celebration of LGBT people, not just our acceptance, and that
Exploded.
yeah, I mean, I realised in the end you can say what you like about God, they just get a bit angry, but talk about gay people.
It's like,
there you
whoa.
go. And in fact, I was thrown out of loads of things, as you know, and banned from going to conferences, and people withdrew funding from Oasis, lots of it, and people who I thought were my friends have still never spoken to me again since then. And so that burnt inside me. That's the point.
Yeah.
And in truth, every day, I think it's every day, I get,
Something.
on social media, people telling me all sorts of terrible things about me. And I learned then, if you hang on to the anger, it kills you. I felt that there was an injustice. The things that I was saying were my opinion. You know, even if you don't think I'm being honest to the Bible, which I thought I was being, you know, can't we live in a society where someone can say something like this inside a church without being chucked out of it? And I also knew that some of the people who were really angry with me were gay.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. Well, but in the closet,
Yeah.
deeply inside
Yeah.
it, and I knew that, but they attacked me publicly.
Yeah.
So to let go of all of that,
So
but it was a good
So
learning
how
curve.
I mean, I can think of like the process, and you know, things always happen, don't they, in life? There is always moments where you get angry with people, or you know, you feel like, so annoying, or why did they do that? But when you felt, because you know, it was really tough, Steve, at that, and like you say, it happens every day as well. How do you allow it to not stick to you? How do you allow unforgiveness? How do you make sure unforgiveness doesn't take root?
For me, I slowly learned that the only person, as I think you've already said, this was having a destructive effect on, when I allowed it to, was myself. You know, there's a fantastic Mennonite saying, and it says, as, anger and unforgiveness is an acid that destroys its container.
Yeah.
It eats away at you. It comes to possess you. And that's a terrible thing. Years and years ago, I was asked to make a television series, present it, this for ITV Anglia Television, which long since ceased to exist, I think.
Was that
It was,
like a knight on
yeah,
a horse, wasn't
and
there?
it was based
Yeah.
in Norwich.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I made this series for them about the 7 deadly sins.
Oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And I made this program about unforgiveness.
Yeah.
And I went to visit a couple who were in the press a lot at the time.
Okay.
What had happened to them, tragically, is that their son had been killed by a dumper lorry, you know, with big wheelbase, etc., and he'd been run over on his bike and squashed by it. And the guy that killed their son, the driver, didn't have a valid license
Oh my word.
and didn't have any insurance and had already been done for dangerous driving. And the whole thing went to court. But the parents who I visited, decided to take things into their own hands. And so one day while the court case was going on, the father turned up outside the courtroom with a shotgun,
Oh no.
and he shot the guy who killed their son. And then he was put on trial for attempted murder. The man didn't die. And in his trial, and he said this to me, because I asked him, was it attempted murder? And he said, absolutely, it was attempted murder. It's my only regret. I didn't murder him. And then he said, he was just too fat. He said he was saved by being fat. He said, but I meant to murder him. In the end, he didn't serve a sentence because of the pain of his situation. But when I went to see him and his wife, which was some years later, I went to their home, and it was like a mausoleum to their son.
Oh wow.
Not just the bedroom hadn't been touched, but the whole house. The whole house was dark. It was a mausoleum, and they sat there, and they'd been physically diminished by this, not just anything else. And they couldn't leave that moment behind. They couldn't leave that moment behind. And other crises, terrible things that happened, you know, parents who'd forgiven the killers of their children, or you know, their child was blown up by a bomb. And we talked about those stories, but they couldn't get to that place. They kept hanging on. And I remember asking the mum, I said, so were you pleased when your husband went out and shot him? And she said, no, not pleased for 2 reasons. One, he didn't kill him. But secondly, even if he had a done, I wanted to pull the trigger,
Wow.
not him. I felt robbed. And what I saw in them, I spent a lot of time with them and kept in contact with them for a little while as I was able to. They had been destroyed, not so much by the death of their son, though I can't imagine that
just
agony.
Just awful.
But they'd been destroyed by not being able to let go. And then I met neighbours of theirs, people who loved them, but everyone I spoke to, and the producer, the television crew that I was with, everyone said they are the recipients of this terrible cancer that's eating them alive. You've got to let go. So I suppose for me, I've never forgotten that, and I've applied that situation to my own circumstances. And then I know people who have forgiven extraordinary things and moved on. Let go. That's what you've got to do.
For me, I often, because I was walking to a train station with one of the Oasis principals quite recently, and she asked me, because they think that I seem to float above, like nothing. I never have grudges, and I was like, no, I do, but one of the things that I've come to understand is how energy consuming unforgiveness is, and how it takes all your zeal and your focus and your joy. It's a robber, and it stops you enjoying the things you're doing. It stops you enjoying life. It stops you entering into new possibilities and new relationships and new. And so if I always try and catch myself if I notice that I feel like a sense of resentment growing up or something, which is a very internal feeling, I think. I'm like, oh, no, because that becomes, as soon as that happens, it's like, right, that's going to take my energy. That's going to, so as well as letting go, it's also acknowledging when that's going to happen, like feeling that start to happen. So that thing of self-awareness, I think, is really important in this, because I'm sure that lots of people have no idea because they aren't, that they don't know that unforgiveness has taken root. But their behaviours tell us outside of them that actually there's something there there's a sadness, there's something that's like the tree, the science of looking at tree rings, which is called dendrochronology. See, I know
Ooh,
big words too.
you do.
I mean,
what's the
lots
word?
of bit.
I don't know.
Dendrochronology. Yeah. So you know when you can tell,
can't even say it.
You can tell the age of a tree
By the rings.
But it's really when you slice a tree, as is your wont, you sometimes
Vandal.
see that there's there's a mark in a certain year. Something's happened, and what's interesting is the tree never dispels that incident. It grows with it, but what it does is it manages to grow around it and
Yes.
to manage it and to make it like it's still strong.
Yeah.
And I think I can. So, for example, go back to that story about my dad. I cannot deny that there was this incident that was one of pain and sadness and anger and all the rest of it. That is part of my story. But my choice is, do I allow that thing to be a toxicity in going forward? And I think choosing, like you say, to let go and it is part of that, not letting it be toxic.
But you feel the mark is left, and you can learn from that, can't you? And you grow through it if you handle it well. Do you know, somebody nicked my bike a few months ago, And yeah, I know you've like kind of,
Yeah.
and they cut. Yeah, I mean it's a terrible thing, but then you think I can learn from that by a bigger lock. but I was getting really mad about it. You
Yeah.
got to let it go. You got to move on. And I do think some of that is about having a big enough vision of life
Yeah.
so you can actually leave behind
Yeah.
things rather than just say you've left them
Yeah.
behind. I think that's important. But to I tweet. Well, actually, it's not called Twitter anymore,
It's called
is it?
you Xing.
Yeah, I exit. That's a strange
What
term,
is
isn't
going
it?
on?
No,
Yeah.
like. Anyway, do you know why I'd tweet? I mean, X. It's because years ago, somebody in Oasis said to me, Steve, it's really important that you send a tweet every day because it's really important. It was Gareth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I said, well, I don't know how to do that. He said, I'll do it for you. And he started doing it. And then lots of people started complaining to me because they said, you don't even send your own tweets. You should send them yourself. Well, I didn't even know where to find the tweets that I hadn't sent, so that's it. So I said to Gareth in the end, Gareth used to work for Oasis, so I said, look, I'll do it. And so now
Every day.
yeah, I think I should do. And people still say to me, you should send tweets, Steve, you should send tweets because then it's a way of talking.
Yeah.
So I do that. And Cornelia, my wife, she says, there you are looking at those tweets again, because I send her a tweet and then I shouldn't say she says it like that, but she's
quite aggressive.
She gets she's not aggressive.
She really isn't.
No, she's not aggressive at all. She says you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. Not send the tweet. She look at the responses.
Yeah.
So there are certain themes whenever I read anything about inclusion or therapeutic care or justice for young people, about inclusion, about the care of the planet, etc. And whenever you do those things, you get this tirade of people who, you're a Marxist, because I'm a Christian, you're the Antichrist. That's kind of like, and every now and then, I get caught up looking at all these things, and that's what Cornelia says to me. She said, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't do that. And of course, I do get caught up in it, and you can get dragged down into it. And sometimes when I'm a bit quiet, I sit there quietly. She said, you've been looking at that Twitter again, because it pulls you in. And you think, here is this person with 2 followers, and they said that, something terrible about me.
Yeah.
And I'm taking that seriously and giving my time and attention to it. So I'm not in any way saying I'm beyond all those things. I just know that it diverts your attention, it diverts your energy, as you've said, it pulls you down. It's about looking beyond that. But at the same time, always asking, so what can I learn? How can I be a better person? Is there something that I've done? Because, one of those things, I think I mentioned it in the book I've just written, A Manifesto for Hope, but there's this thing which is known as moral misattribution theory. It's psychological theory, which sounds very, what on earth's that about? But it's very plain when it comes down to it. See, when I am rude or unkind, when I am short with somebody, when I'm dismissive of somebody, and it's brought to my attention, I say, well, I was tired. And I had a tough day. It was the end of the week. If only you knew what I've had to get through today, and that rotten phone call I had, and et cetera. And I've been ill, and I've got a headache. I didn't have breakfast. I'm hungry. All that kind of stuff. So we always apply that to ourselves. But if someone else behaves in that way, they're a bit short, or they send us a slightly dismissive email or whatever. God, blimey, that kind of person, they're just a wrong 'un, they're a bad person. And so we understand the things that sometimes make us behave in a less than optimal way. But when other people do that to us, we jump to conclusions. And at the heart of all these things is often a kind of misunderstanding. In fact, sometimes what will happen to me, must happen to you, somebody will complain to me about somebody else in a conversation, and I think, I don't think they meant that, but and then I talk to the other person and they complain about it, and it's all misunderstanding because we begin from a very us point of view. We are the centre of our universes, aren't we? And it's about getting beyond us.
Yeah, and when I find myself in those conversations with people, I what I do is say, I wonder what if you imagined that actually they were saying it. Imagine they were saying it this way, and just dialing down the anger, just dialing, taking the sting out of all of it, so that you can actually breathe and consider that you can look at things in different ways, and maybe they didn't mean it, and in the way that you've received it, and
And our society, tragically, as we all know, is becoming so polarized.
Absolutely,
isn't it? So it's not just as you look across to America that these culture wars are going on, but the difference between the left and the right in our country, and it's. I understand that society is made up of people with different views and different opinions, and not to attack people. That's what, actually, going back to Twitter for a moment, X, I find that, to set out an opinion is one thing. To attack someone
completely
is a
different.
bizarre thing to do, in my view. Did I help? Did I bring truth? Did I bring light to the situation?
Yeah.
And if I didn't bring help, then why did I do it?
Why did you join in? Yeah. So unforgiveness is like a weapon, isn't it? And anger is like a weapon. Grudges are like a weapon. If we don't put the weapon down, what we're really doing is using the weapon on ourselves. Ultimately, that's what we're saying. Isn't it? It's us that's...
Yeah, and a very literal way in which that works out is in, I'm just thinking of gang life in London.
Yeah.
Do you know, I was talking to a young 18-year-old that sat down and had a long conversation with him, someone I know, just quite recently, and he had seen his brother, younger, terrorised by someone with a weapon. And so he decided to get a weapon so that he could defend his brother. And he was saying to me, he said, round here, you have to have a weapon. You have to be in the gang. You have to have a weapon. I mean, he wasn't, he's a very sensible lad, but he said, if you're not weaponized, if you're not tooled up, you are very vulnerable. And the tragedy is that there's a lot about that. He was being honest. He wasn't kind of making this stuff up. But I was saying to him, but if you get dragged into that, then in actual fact, it's very likely to end, if not in your death, with you in prison, but you will not fulfill your dreams for your life. And actually, in his case, we spent some hours together, and it's somebody who he knows I've invested in him over the years, and I know that he chose a different path in that way. But you could see him being eaten
almost
by
like a
the
battle.
unforgiveness of the attack on his brother.
Yeah. Like you say, it's so evident in society, isn't it? And there's this, the story of Jesus that Jesus told about the prodigal son, and which is often presented as this story of forgiveness, isn't it? But there's a bit of a twist in that story, isn't there? 'Cause where it comes from, really.
Yeah, there's a lot of twists in the story. The story of the prodigal son is a very famous one, isn't it? About this son who gets his share of the money from his dad, goes away, squanders it all on wild living, prostitutes, all the rest of it, then runs out, ends up working in a pigsty and thinks, I'm going to go home and beg to my dad for forgiveness and all the rest of it. And his father accepts him. Well, the funny thing about that story is Jesus nicked it.
Jesus stole.
Well,
Unbelievable.
he did. We know he did.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't nick it. It was a well-known story. It was a well-known story. And it comes from India. It comes from North India. And we know it comes from India because it's recorded and written down way before Jesus' life. We have earlier copies of it, do you see? But the interesting thing, in a lot of these stories, and the story was what the crowd knew.
Yeah.
But what Jesus did was twisted the end in two ways. So in the story, the original story, what happens is this lad goes off and wastes all his father's wealth and lives a selfish lifestyle, and then comes home. And what the father does is say, well, you can't live in my house, but you can live down the street, and you must earn forgiveness.
Yeah.
And slowly the son earns forgiveness stage by stage, and then the father gives him all his inheritance and wealth. And it's a story about restoration and earning restoration. But when Jesus tells the story, there's two completely different things. He tells the story everyone knows, and they're going, oh, yeah, we know this story, we know this story. And then Jesus says, and the guy comes home, and they go, yeah, we know what's going to happen. He slowly, earns forgiveness and inherits all the wealth. But Jesus says, but the father saw him coming and ran to him and said to the older brother, there was never an older brother in the original story, let's throw a party and let's put the ring on his finger and let's kill the fatted cow now and do all of this kind of stuff because this son of mine's come home, let rejoice, put these robes on him and all the rest of it. And that's the thing. It's not a slowly earned forgiveness. No. It's not like, you've really upset me, but I'm going to make it bad for you, but slowly things will get better. And the moral of the first story is if you work at it, eventually you can find forgiveness. What Jesus' story is about is unconditional forgiveness now. And then he's introduced this second son, who's not in the original Indian story either. And he says, and this second lad gets really cross and goes to the father and says, God, that's not fair. I've been here all my life serving you, and he comes home and you make him a son just outright. It shouldn't be like that. And the father says, I've always given you everything. You're my son. Why shouldn't I give it to him as well? And so the story isn't just about unconditional forgiveness. It's about the grudges that those who think they're righteous harbour against others who they think are lesser than them, which brings us all back to the moral misattribution theory, doesn't it? The second son thinks I'm deserving.
Yeah.
But
he doesn't deserve.
Yeah, not knowing his story, and yet the father, overwhelmed with love, sees it all and offers grace to everyone.
Yeah.
Which is what Jesus meant, by the way, when he said, forgive your enemies, he didn't mean because it really upsets them. He meant because actually in forgiving your enemy, you have to explore the little dark parts of your soul that you try to keep hidden. You've got to explore all your prejudices, all your hang-ups. You've got to delve deep into you. So in forgiving others, you grow. You become a better person. You become a deeper, richer person, like the illustration of the mark on the tree.
Yeah, there's this little thing I do when it's a question I ask people or a statement, I guess, that I offer people when they come to me. Say in my work, Steve, as you know, I end up in lots of conversations with people and things about how they're doing with one another and all the rest of it. And people will say, like you've just said, it's not fair. I'm so angry with them. It's not fair. And I just say to them, it's really interesting, isn't it? And just in that, there's like this, and it's a bit like what my chaplain said to me. He said, life's shit sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
But be curious because everything's ahead.
Yeah. Two things to say. One thing to say to finish with. But first of all, I realised I just told that story and people say, how come the story came from India and Jesus lived in Israel? It's because of Alexander the Great, just as a factual bit,
Yeah.
because Alexander the Great conquered great empires and conquered North India
the
and
known
set up
world.
trade routes.
Yeah.
And then these stories and culture flooded back. That's a tiny thing. But that forgiveness thing, I remember reading one of C.S. Lewis's books years and years ago, so I can't tell you which one it is. But he says this. He says, we say, I'll forgive you because I know it wasn't your fault. I'll forgive you because I know you were tired. I'll forgive you because I know you didn't have all the facts. And C.S. Lewis makes the point, if it wasn't your fault or you didn't know all the facts, you don't need to forgive anyone.
Nothing to forgive.
Yeah, there's nothing to forgive. That you know, they just didn't know. They did. It wasn't their fault. So don't forgive them because it wasn't their fault. He said the only time forgiveness means anything is when it was their fault, when there isn't an excuse, when there wasn't a reason. That is when you know that you're learning the freeing art of forgiveness.
Thank you, Steve.